they turn off all the lights, I won't read you your wrongs or your rights. When time is gone, I'll tell you goodnight, close the door. I'll tell you I love you once more. When time is gone, so here it is. I'm not your son, you're not my father. We're just two grown men saying goodbye. No need to forgive, no need to forget. I know your mistakes and you know mine. While you're sleeping, I try to make you proud. So daddy, won't you just close your eyes? Don't be afraid, it's my turn to chase the monsters away. Oh, well, I'll read a story to you. Only difference is this one is true. Time is gone. I folded your clothes on the chair. I hope you sleep well, don't be scared. The time is gone.
The year's 1970. I'm a young boy, growing up in a big family. I had an older brother, 4 older sisters, and 1 baby sister. My brother's name was David. My older sisters were Rita, Betty, Grace, Bernadette, and then I had my baby sister Maggie, who was only a year old at this time. My father had always been an avid outdoorsman, as long as I can remember. But his real passion was duck hunting. Duck hunting was probably one of the things he loved to do most in this world. And the way it all started with my father was one day a friend of his called him and told him that the place that he worked, that there was a stray Labrador Retriever that had been out there in the parking lot. And his friend knew that my dad was looking for a hunting dog. He called my father up and said, "Hey, I don't know if you're still interested, but if you are, there's a Labrador Retriever pup out there in the parking lot. Either somebody left him or abandoned him, but I was wondering if you might want to get him." And by the time he finished that last sentence, my dad was in his truck on the way down to that place to pick up that dog. Now, mind you, my dad at that time was 35 years old. He had 7 kids. He was a lieutenant in the Albuquerque Fire Department. Him and my mother had a great marriage. I had a great life. I grew up, up to that point, having a wonderful life. My father was a very awesome man. He was not just a fireman. He was my hero. A lot of people say that they have, good relationships with their father, but the relationship that I had with my father was special, and I know it. And I know it because every time I was near him and I saw the look in his eyes, I could feel the love that he had for me and how happy I made him when I was around him. All that being said, let's get back to the story. Anyway, my father went and picked up that dog. He trained him for a 1.5 years on his own. He went and bought a book on how to train dogs. And I remember he would have live pigeons, and what he would do is he would get my mother's nylons, he would cut them in half, tie a knot on the one end, and then he would put these pigeons inside them so they were alive but they couldn't fly. And then he would hide them in different places throughout the yard, and then he would let the dog go out and retrieve them. And he named his dog Shadow, and Shadow was a natural born hunter. This dog loved to hunt, and he loved to make my dad happy. And I'll tell you, I never seen my dad as happy as I had when I would see him with his dogs. My dad loved his dog, and when he finally got him, he he was happy beyond measure, actually. The thing is my dad was a fireman, okay, and as most of you know, firemen have hectic work schedules. He would work 3 days on, 3 nights on, and then 3 days off. On his nights, he would stay at the station with the other firefighters, but he would call every night about 9 o'clock. And my dad was very strict. He was very structured. He was a perfectionist. He liked things the way he liked them, and that's the way it was. That's the way I was raised, so it didn't bother me. I never questioned it. So he would call us about 9 o'clock. My mother would answer the phone, and then we would all stand in line, and it was you would talk to him in order of your age. So first it would be my brother Dave, then Rita, Betty, Grace, Bernadette, myself, and my baby sister was only a year old. She was too young to talk. Then my mother would talk to him for about 5 more minutes, and then he would hang up, and she would go to bed. And it was crazy because we would just all get the phone and we would say, "Good night, Dad, I love you." And then on to the next one. "Good night, Dad, I love you. Good night, Dad, I love you. Good night, Dad, I love you," so on and so forth. But the thing was even though my dad loved to hunt, duck hunt, he really couldn't find anybody else that liked to hunt with him. What I mean is, my brother liked to hunt, but my brother was in school, and duck hunting season in New Mexico is in January, in December and January. So, my brother was in school, and the days that my dad was off, he didn't have anybody to go hunt with. So, it was kind of, he tried getting my mother into it, but it just wasn't her cup of tea. So, a lot of times he would go alone. And when he finally got his dog, that's when he really, really got into hunting. During those years, I was too young to go. I was only 5 years old. So, like I say, when he first got into the duck hunting thing, he would go alone, he would take his decoys and he'd be gone. And a lot of times he would be gone all day and he would come back and he'd be empty handed, But when he got his dog, all that changed. And suddenly duck hunting took on a whole new meaning for him. And when I tell you that Shadow was loved to hunt, that's exactly what I mean. That dog would not let my father down, no matter what. Anyway, this one January morning, or I should say evening, because the way my father was, when he was home at night, the kids, we were allowed to stay up till 8:30. At 8:30, we all would have to go to bed. And then my dad and my mom would sit on the couch at 9 o'clock. He would watch Gunsmoke, have a cigarette, and then he would go to bed. And believe me, you didn't want to bother my father when he was watching Gunsmoke. God help you. And it was crazy because I remember there was times when I would get up to go use the bathroom at night, and it would be like late, like midnight maybe. And I guess my father, he's kind of like me. And what I mean is, I was a truck driver for many years. And then I worked for FEMA and did other jobs, but my sleeping habits are all over the place. I'm not the kind of person, I've never had a 9-to-5 job. So I'm not the kind of person that, goes to work and then comes home in bed by 10, up by 6, and because my job's, a lot of times when I was driving trucks, I would drive all night. So my father, when he worked nights, he was always on edge because, firefighters, there'd be sound asleep and suddenly an alarm goes off. They got to jump out of bed and all that. So my father was a very light sleeper. And I remember a couple times when I would get up to use the bathroom and I would go walk through the living room to the bathroom. I just remember seeing the little glow of his cigarette as he was sitting on the couch having a smoke like 1, 2 in the morning. My father was a wonderful person, and when we lost him, it was something that was devastating to my whole family, and something that I think we never really quite recovered from. But anyway, getting back to the story. So this particular evening, my father tells me, "Mijo," he goes, "I'm going to take you duck hunting with me tomorrow, okay?" Well, of course, I was 5 years old. I didn't know anything. I just said, okay. I mean, in those years, when your parents told you something, you didn't question it. All you said, yes, whatever. So, for example, if my mom would say, we'll go, You're not gonna eat, go to bed or whatever. That's exactly what we did. We didn't question it. We didn't backbite. We didn't talk back because we weren't raised that way. We were raised to be respectful of our parents, and when they said something, we did it. Period. No questions asked. So I don't mind telling you that that night it was a long night for me because when my father went duck hunting, he would get up at 3 in the morning, you know, load up all his stuff, and then take off. And I never went with him duck hunting before then, so I mean I would just hear him up in the morning, and then I could smell a coffee or whatever, and then he would leave, and he'd be out all day, and that was it. So this particular morning, sure enough, like clockwork, 3 o'clock comes around. My mother was always up first. She would get up first, and she would start brewing coffee, and she would make fresh tortillas every day. And on the days he went duck hunting, she would make him breakfast burritos with egg and bacon and stuff like that. And you could smell the food cooking. You remember those days when moms used to cook 3 meals a day. You're back in 1970. The '70s. I mean, I'm a Gen X kid. You know what I mean? That's the way we lived. Our mothers stayed home. They raised the kids. They did all the house stuff, and the dads went out and worked and you know took the family out hunting and fishing and camping and that stuff. That's the way it was in those days. Anyway, I hadn't slept all night really. I just laid there in my bed looking up at the sun and wondering what kind of adventure I was about to go into with my father, because like I said, I loved hanging out with my father and as much as possible. And the thing was, on the days that he was off during the day, when my brothers and sisters were in school, I would be with him all day. He would take me with him everywhere, And I just remember him in his 1965 Chevy C10, little baby blue, a little short step side pickup. I just remember me standing up on the seat next to him and hugging his neck as he drove down the road. Those were some of my best memories, of my father. But so I hear my mother get up at 3 a.m. and I could hear the pots and pans in the kitchen being rattled around and stuff, and then I hear my father get up, and my father was a big man. He wasn't heavy. He was just a big man. He was 6 feet tall, 235 pounds. He was a man's man. And I just remember hearing him go in the bathroom and stuff. And the thing is, as a boy, I used to love to watch my father shave. It was one of my favorite things to do. So I got up, and he was in the bathroom, and my father, he was so. I just remember him being so happy that morning. My father loved Spanish music, So I just remember him in the bathroom, and I remember he was whistling, and he was in the mirror shaving, and I was just standing behind him watching him shave, and he didn't even know I was there. And then, he turned around and he saw me standing there, and he said, "Oh, mijo," he goes, "Good, you're up." He goes, "You ready for a big adventure?" And I said, "Yeah, Dad, I am." So the day before, he took me to a local department store in downtown Albuquerque. It was called Gizmos, and that's where all the firefighters at that time and the city workers and the police and all that's where they all got their uniforms from. And at that time, Gizmos was a pretty big deal. It was like J.C. Penney's, whatever. And he had took me there a couple of days earlier, and he had bought me a new coat. He bought me some, a pant. He bought me some boots, a little hat, some hunting gear. It was my very first time going with him, and I think he was proud of that. So that morning, one of my favorite things to do after my dad was shaved, I loved to touch my dad's face. I just remember touching his face, and I could feel his little whiskers coming through, and the way he smelled with his Aquavalva. And I mean, it was magical to me. So he takes me in the room and gets me all dressed up. Meanwhile, I could hear my mom in the kitchen cooking, and then she's over there, "Viejo, are you almost ready?" And my dad's like, "Yeah, Mama." He goes, "I'm ready. I'm just getting the baby ready." He goes, "I'll be right out," whatever. So then we go to the kitchen. He sits me on the kitchen. My mom makes me a cup of hot chocolate. And my dad goes out, starts loading the truck up, putting his decoys in there, his gun, his bullet, his shotgun shells. And then the whole time all this is happening, I could just hear Shadow in the backyard just barking crazy, because he knew he was going hunting that day. And about a couple of months before that, my dad had just built him a brand new kennel with a cement floor. I mean, beautiful. My dad loved his dogs. That's the thing that was his pride and joy. So, I'm in the kitchen sitting there. You got to remember, I'm 5 years old. It's 3:30 in the morning. There's all kinds of stuff going on. My mom's cooking away and loading my dad up, filling his thermos with coffee. My dad's loading the truck. He's getting the dog. I could hear the dog running around outside barking and stuff. And like I said, my dad had a little C10 pickup, baby blue, with a little camper shell that he had built, and he was loading all the stuff up, putting the dog in the truck and everything. And then he comes inside, and I'm just freaking out. I'm just sitting there like, okay. So I remember my mom giving him his food, and she used to wrap all his burritos in tinfoil, and it was crazy because my dad had made this little invention, and what it was it was a metal 5-gallon bucket, and he had put holes in the side, and then he had two screens inside it. One was about 10 inches off the bottom of the bucket, and then the other one was a couple inches above that. And what he would do when he went duck hunting is he would fill it with charcoal, and he would light it in the blind, and it would keep you warm, but there was no smoke. So the smoke, I guess, would it wouldn't scare the ducks away or whatever. So she's handing him his burrito and his thermos, and I just remember him saying, "Let's go, mijo," and he reaches over, hugs my mom, gives her a kiss, and she says, "Okay, good luck." She said, "Take care of my baby," she told my father. And he said, "Oh yeah, I will." And there we went. We were off into the night. The place we used to hunt was on the Rio Grande River in Los Lunas, New Mexico, which at the time was about 35 miles from my house in Albuquerque. So here me and my dad go. It's still dark outside, and I mean, in those days, in the 1970s, I mean, it was like, between the hours of, I don't know, like 9 o'clock and probably 6 in the morning, it's like somebody rolled the sidewalks up in town because there was nobody out. There was no traffic. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. It was real quiet. It was beautiful in those days. So I just remember driving. I'm sitting in the passenger side of the truck. My dad's driving with his camos on, and the dog's in the back, or jumping around barking and moving the whole truck as we're driving down the road. And my dad loved to listen to Spanish music, so he had his radio on, and he was just whistling. I just remember him being so happy that day. And I couldn't even see over the dashboard. You gotta remember, like I said, I was only 5 years old, so we're sitting there, and it's still dark. And so we get to Los Lunas. We get to the turnoff on the river, and the way it works is the Rio Grande River that runs through New Mexico. In that part of the state, in between Albuquerque all the way to Belen or whatever, it has a drainage ditch right next to the river that the farmers use to irrigate their fields or whatever. So there's a road on that ditch. So we turn off the main street, get on that ditch, and we're driving, and then so there's the ditch, and then there's the road you drive on, and then on the other side of that road is the river. So remember, it's pitch dark. I can't even see over the windshield. All I know is it's dark outside. So suddenly we get to the ditch, and then we were driving down the ditch, and you could feel the difference. We're going over bumps and a dirt road and stuff like that, and all I could see was the light from the headlights of the vehicle and the trees. And I remember thinking to myself, I was kind of scary, because like I say again, I was only 5 years old, and if you know anything about Hispanic culture, you know that all of our parents would always tell us stories of La Llorona. And La Llorona was supposed to be some lady that drowned her kids in the river, and she would walk the ditch banks and the river banks or whatever at night looking for kids, and y'all know the story. I don't have to tell you. So these were the things that were going through my mind. So we drive down this dirt road for, on the ditch, for probably 5 or 6 miles, And then my dad comes to the turnoff where he parks his truck, and then he'll walk into the river or whatever. So now, we're turning down this road and everything. We go probably about another, maybe 500, 600 feet or whatever. And that's it. He gets to his parking spot, and he turns the truck off, turns out the lights, and he lights a cigarette. And I just remember, now I'm really freaking out because it's about 5:30 probably in the morning. I mean, it's pitch dark outside. You can't, any of you who've been in the forest or whatever. At night, you know what I'm talking about. You can't see your hand in front of your face. But again, all I could hear was the dog in the back barking and excited to hunt. I just remember my dad sitting there in the dark smoking a cigarette, drinking a cup of coffee from his thermos. So this went on probably for, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. And then just as soon as as soon as he finished his cigarette, put his cigarette out, and then he just jumped to it. He said, okay. He clapped his hands together, said, here we go. And he opened his door. And when he opened his door, let me tell you, it was cold. I had never felt cold like that before. I mean, it's the first time I'd been out in a situation like that. And I just remember him opening the door, and that cold hit me in the face like a frying pan. I was like, wow. And then he closed the door, and I thought he was going to walk around no, I thought he was going to, because when he would go out the driver's side, I would jump up on the seat and I'd walk over to him and I'd get out on the same side. But he looked at me before he got out, and he said, he goes, Mijo, I want you to stay here. He goes, I'm going to go take the decoys and stuff to the blind. He goes, then I'll be back for you. He goes, I'll stay in the truck. I said, I just said, okay. I just nodded at him, okay, Dad, whatever. So he gets out, walks to the back of the truck, opens the tailgate. I could hear the dog jumping out, barking, running around all excited in the leaves, leaves of the cottonwoods. I could smell the crisp, cold air, I mean, it was magical. I mean, let me tell you, a young boy going on his first hunting trip with his father, that's rite of passage. I mean, that's what we live for, as boys, we look up to our fathers, and to be invited on your very first hunting trip with your father, it's a feeling that you can't. There's no explanation for how it felt for me, anyway. I was so excited. I was petrified. I was scared. I was happy. All kinds of stuff was going through my head, But the main thing that was going through my head was I was there with my father, and that was the most important thing to me. So I hear my dad get out, the dog ran around. My dad used to keep his decoys in these big gunny sacks. I hear him grab his decoys and stuff. And what he did was, he opened the door, took the truck to excuse me, let me slow down for a minute, I'm getting ahead of myself. He opened the door to the truck, and he told his dog to get in the truck, and Shadow jumped in the truck. Okay, so now Shadow's in the truck with me. He closed the door, and then he starts walking towards the river. And mind you, it was real foggy that morning. It was cold and it was very foggy. I don't know I can't remember. I think it was going to snow or something. But so you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. All I remember is hearing my father walking, through the leaves of the cottonwoods, and I could hear the decoys in his back rattling around, and then he just disappeared into the night. And I remember I could hear him walking in the water of the river, because my dad, he would always build his hunting blinds, like about a couple weeks before hunting season. And he always built his duck hunting blinds on a sandbar in the middle of the river. A lot of guys like to hunt from the side of the river, but my dad preferred to hunt in the middle of the river. So he would build his blinds on the sandbar, so that every time he wanted to go to his blind, he used to have to walk through the river. So I just remember I could hear him out there, splashing. His feet falling in the water, and I could hear his footsteps getting farther away and farther away, and Shadow was just like, he pushed me out of the way, because I was sitting on the passenger side. I moved to the middle of the seat, and the dog jumped over me, and he was just sitting there looking out the window, looking for my father, because I guess normally my father would take him with him, but I guess my father didn't want to leave me alone, by myself in the truck or whatever. But so for about, I don't know, maybe 10-15 minutes, I could hear my father splashing around in the river, and I could hear him throwing his decoys out. And I remember seeing his decoys as a child, but I didn't know what they were. They looked like toys to me. And I remember because what he would do is, his decoys, he would put a string on the bottom of them, and then it would be like, I don't know, maybe 4 feet long, the string, and then on the end of the string, he would have a little lead plate, and then when he would throw the decoys out, that lead plate would sink to the bottom, of the river, and then the decoys would float around or whatever. But I just remember him throwing it. I could hear him throwing his decoys, you know, and you could hear him in the water, psh, splashing, psh, psh, psh. Man, it was, and the whole time all this was happening, I just, I was trying to, I remember I was trying to, in my head, trying to think what was going on. I didn't know, I'd never been hunting before. The times that my dad would bring ducks home, I mean, I didn't know what he did to get them. I just remember him leaving early, and then when he got home, he had a couple of ducks with him, and that was all. I didn't know the process involved in getting them. So anyway, about 15 minutes later, all of a sudden you could hear him coming back towards the truck. You could hear his footsteps in the water getting closer and closer and closer, and then you could hear him step out of the river, back through the leaves, and then I could see him coming towards the truck. And believe me, when I saw him, man, there was such a feeling of relief on me. I just couldn't stand it because I was terrified up to that point. Now remember, it's about, I don't know, about 5:15, 5:20, about this time. Still darker than heck, still colder than crap. My dad opens the door on the driver's side. The dog jumps out, and then my dad says, he goes, mijo, he goes, I'm gonna go to the back and get the bucket, his gun, his bullet, his shells and stuff like that. He goes, and then he goes, when I come back, he goes, I want you to jump on my back, hold me around the neck. He goes, and then whatever you do, he goes, don't let go, hold on tight. So I said, okay, I just did what he said. So he went and got his shotgun. He filled the gunny sack that the decoys were in. He put that can I was telling you about, the charcoal, his burritos, his thermos, and his shells and everything. He grabbed his shotgun. And I remember he used to carry this little dog whistle around his neck. And I don't know if you've ever seen those dog whistles that they use for the hunting dogs. They're about 3 inches long, and they're real skinny. They look almost like a writing pen or something. And when they blow it, they blow out a real high-pitched sound. I mean, it's almost so high that humans can't hear it. So he had the whistle in his mouth, and he would whistle twice, and that was a signal for his dog to come. So then, the dog would go sit next to him or whatever. So I just remember him backing up to the truck, and I jumped on his back. I grabbed him around the neck, like he said. He closed the door, and off we went to the blind. I just remember, as we got closer to the river, I could hear the water of the river flowing. Remember, it was Rio Grande River. It was early January. The river at that time usually is pretty full, flowing hard. And I had no idea what was going to happen next. We get to the edge of the riverbank. He tells me, hold on. He steps down into the river, and it was muddy. He slipped a little bit, but he didn't fall. The dog jumps in the water, splashing, and also the dog's like swimming right next to him. And I just remember I could just hear his feet hitting the water as we're walking across the river. And slowly his blind started coming into sight. I could see the blind, and I just remember thinking, man, that's pretty cool looking. It was cool. My dad used to build some awesome blinds, and I didn't have my gloves on yet. I remember, and I just remember the whole time. While I was on my dad's back, I just remember feeling his back. I was feeling his face with my hand. I used to love to feel my dad's face. And I just remember it being one of the most special times of my life. For gosh sakes, I was 5 years old, and I was on a hunting trip with my father. There was decoys floating around us. His dog was swimming next to us. We were headed towards the blind. He was carrying a shotgun. I could still smell the aqua alba on his face. It was something like you see on a hunting video or something. It was like a wild world of sports or something. I can't even explain how wonderful it was. So we get to the blind, and I had never been in it before, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. We go in there, and we see there's a bench across there, and I don't know if you've ever seen a hunting blind, but the sides are built with like logs and stuff like that, and then he would cover it with branches and leaves. He had a bench in there to sit down, and on the side, on this where he would sit, he had a little hole in the side of the blind, like a little doggy door for his dog to run in and out to fetch the ducks. So by this time it's probably about 5:45, and you could see it's starting to get light. It's still dark, but you can see the sun is finally starting to rise. It's still colder than heck, water flowing, still foggy. you know. And I just remember my dad lighting up he took the can out and he put the charcoal in it, he lit it up. You know, then suddenly you could start seeing the coals of the charcoal glowing. And you could start feeling the heat. You know, he was giving his dog a treat, and he had the dog was laying. He used to take a blanket, and the dog would lay on there. So you know, it was me, my father, and his dog in the hunting blind. You know, he poured himself a cup of coffee. He poured me a little cup of hot chocolate. My mom sent me, and of course I spilled it all over myself. But he didn't care. He didn't get mad at me or anything. You know. And then he put his burritos on there to heat, because like I said, my mom would wrap them in foil, so he would just set them on there and let them warm up. And so we're just sitting there, me and him, and he's drinking a cup of coffee, he's smoking a cigarette, and his burritos are warming up and stuff. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, man, you know, to me, it was. I couldn't explain the feeling I was feeling. I was excited, happy, scared, you name it. There was so much emotions going through my head at that time, you know. But like I say, all I knew was I was there hunting with my father, and that in itself, it probably was the greatest thing that I had ever been through up to that point in my life. You know, I think that those days, you know, are few and far between. And what I mean is, life was so much simpler back then. It really was. You know, I know a lot of you who are young and stuff don't kind of comprehend what I'm saying, but you know, let me tell you what I mean by that. Growing up, I came from a big family. You know, my dad, he had one brother and a sister, so he only had, you know, two other siblings. So my dad didn't come from a very big family, but my mother, she had 13 brothers and sisters. And you know, if you in a family that has 13 brothers and sisters that are married, you know, let me tell you, I grew up on my mom's side. I grew up with over 200 cousins. You know, and so you know, I was on the, you know, in those days on the weekends, we'd all go to our grandparents' house, and you know, they would barbecue. My dad and my uncles would pull out the guitars and start playing the guitars and singing, and the kids would be outside running around, and it was just a wonderful time to live. You know, there was no gunshots, there was no fighting, there was no. It was just wonderful. You know, I remember my grandfather. There was a little store down the street from his house, and he had credit there. So when all my cousins would come around, and let me tell you, at that time I probably had like 30 cousins. You know, we'd all walk to the store, and he had credit there. So you know, he would say, "You guys go to the store, and you guys get you guys some candy, whatever." So we'd all go over there in a big old line. We walk to that store, and we get our little candies and stuff, and the guy would put it on my grandfather's credit account or whatever. And that's the way it was. You know, people still did deals on a handshake back in those days. And it was just a very special time to grow up. And you know, unfortunately, I feel in my heart that those days are gone forever. But this story that I'm telling you, it's been something that I've kept in my heart for most of my life. It's very personal to me, because it was, this particular moment was one of the only times in my life when I felt that I truly had my father all to myself. It was just me and him, nobody else. He didn't have no bills that day. He didn't have to worry about my brothers and sisters, my mom. He didn't have to worry about, you know, work. It was just him and his son hunting. And it was something that I'll never forget, and something that I've always kept near and dear to me, and very personal. And you know, a lot of people that know me, you know, when they meet me, they think that my dad passed away, you know, just a couple of years ago or whatever, because I'm always constantly talking about my father. When I tell them that he died over 50 years ago, they can't believe it. They tell me, well, and you still think about him the way you do. I mean, you know, you should get over it or whatever. But the thing is, I'll never get over it. I don't want to get over it, because the feelings that I have for my father, the experiences, although there were very few of them, they keep me connected to him, and I love my father. Why would I want to ever forget about my father? So I think of these things, and the other day it was my dad's anniversary of the day he passed away, in August, and I just remember sitting here and looking at my dad's picture and thinking of those times, and I started, crying. But I don't know if it was from happy times, the memory of being happy with my dad that day, or if it was that I was sad that those days were never going to come again. And that's why I tell people, if you still have your parents, you better cherish them, because once they're gone, that's it. You're gonna have a void in your heart that nothing can fill, nothing. So, getting back to the story, okay, so now it's about probably 6:15, 6:20, and you can see the clouds are starting to lift. It's getting a little lighter outside. I could start seeing a little bit more down the river and stuff like that. And so my dad puts his thermos down. He turns the cigarettes out, whatever, and he pulls his shotgun out of the case and starts loading it up. And let me tell you, when the first time you're on a hunting trip with your father and he pulls out his gun and starts loading it up, I mean, life takes on a whole new meaning. It's magical for a boy, you know. People want to say this, that, and the other about guns or whatever, and that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. But for me, guns have always been a very big part of my life, because my father always had them when I was growing up. I've always carried them. My brothers carry on them. We're a gun family. That's just the way we are. So, but the first time he pulled it out, I just remember him pulling. I as he was loading it up and stuff, I was just sitting there like my heart was pumping. I was all excited. I was wide awake. The dog sat up, so because the dog knew that it's about that time. And then I just remember hearing, all of a sudden I started hearing geese, and the Canadian geese were flying first. Now, in New Mexico, duck hunting is a little different. Like, for example, if you live in Florida or if you live in Louisiana, Georgia, states like that, because the way we hunt here is we hunt on the river, on the Rio Grande River, and the ducks we hunt are part of that Western Flyway Zone, and they're migrating down to Mexico. So the ducks and the geese, they all fly straight down the river. So I just remember hearing the geese, and that's the thing about my father. That's the reason my father loved the fall. He absolutely loved the fall in New Mexico. Starting around October, because you could start hearing the geese flying, and the minute those geese started flying in the sandhill crane, my father would I don't know, it's hard to explain. He was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, he just had a big old smile because he knew that hunting season was just right around the corner, and that's what he lived for. His whole year revolved around duck hunting, I think. And so we hear the Canadian geese flying, and it's not completely light yet, and it's still a little foggy, so I really can't see that much. I'm looking up and I'm not seeing anything, but I'm hearing them flying. Finally, about, I don't know, I would say 15 till 7 o'clock or whatever, the sun, and now it's peaking, and it's light outside. The fog is lifting, or I should say, it's already almost lifted. I could at this point, I could see down the river, maybe a quarter mile or whatever. And then suddenly, you start hearing ducks, and you could hear the ducks flying, and you could hear them quacking. And the minute I heard them, my father, man, you should have seen. He perked up. He right away looked at me and said, "Okay, Mijo, be very quiet, be very still." He said, I said, "Okay." I didn't say anything. Like I said, we didn't answer back. I just instinctively just stood still. I sat there still. And suddenly, I see these ducks flying over. The only thing is they were higher than heck. I remember they were so high they looked like flies to me. And I remember thinking to myself, how is he gonna get these ducks? They're too high. There's no way he can do that. Thinking to myself. So, he pulls out his duck calls and he starts calling the ducks in. And those of you, who've ever been duck hunting or who've ever watched it on TV, whatever, know what I'm talking about. He started with his duck calls. He goes, and boy, I mean, it was awesome. The dog's ears were standing straight up and everything. But I still didn't know. I still kept thinking to myself, how's he gonna get these ducks? They're so high, because I had never been duck hunting before. And then it was crazy because I just remember seeing these 5 ducks flying over, and then he started blowing his duck call, and then suddenly I seen him flying back the other direction, but they were lower this time. So what they were doing is they were circling, and so he was calling, and every time the ducks I would see him fly over the blind, they were a little bit lower. Then they would come from the other direction, they'd be a little bit lower, and then a little bit lower, so on and so forth. And then suddenly, probably they were maybe, I don't know, 20 feet up in the air, and they were coming in for a landing. They were going to land right in the decoys. Suddenly, my father jumped up, and boom, he started shooting. Boom, boom. Man, I was freaking out. Let me tell you, I was covering my ears and everything. And it's crazy the things you remember, because I don't remember the gunshots, hearing the gunshots as much as I remember hearing the clicking of his shotgun as he was chambering, shell after shell. It was a pump shotgun. I think it was let's see, what was that shotgun? It was an old Remington, I think. Yeah, Remington pump action. I just remember boom, boom, boom. He was shooting, and I could smell the gun. I could smell the gunpowder. The bullets. I mean, the empty shells were flying all over the place, and he knocked 2 ducks down. And the other ones took off. And then as soon as he did that, he put his whistle in his mouth. He blew it once, and the dog, Shadow, just took off like a bullet. He was focused on that. And I see, the thing is, one of the ducks was still alive, so it was swimming up the river, and the river was flowing pretty fast that day. So the dog was, the duck was probably, I don't know, maybe 30 yards ahead of the dog. And let me tell you, that dog, he jumped in that river like a bullet. He was focused, and he went straight to that duck, and he got it. And I remember him bringing it back, and he was flapping, and he was still quacking and everything. And he jumps up on the river, on the sandbar. He runs into the blind. He drops the duck at my dad's foot, turns around and shoots right back out, and goes and gets the other one. Brings it back, drops it at my dad's feet again. My dad says, "Good boy," whatever, and he rubs him down. He gives him a treat, and then the dog shakes off, and yeah, he's shaking muddy river water all over the blind and everything, get me all wet, but I didn't care. I didn't care about none of that. I didn't care about none of that stuff. All I knew was I was having the adventure of my life. Little did I know that it would be the first and last time that me and my father would ever hunt together. And that's what really, that's why this experience is so near and dear to my heart, like I say, because for that moment in time in my life, I was living every boy's dream. I was actually duck hunting with my father, and it was just me and him. I didn't have no sisters yelling at me, pulling my hair. I didn't have my brother pushing me around. It was just me and my father, and he loved me, and he was happy. He was proud that he got those ducks. And I just remember him looking at me, holding one of the ducks up, the one that was still alive, and I just remember him grabbing it by the neck and swinging it around until it died, broke his neck or whatever. And he looked at me, he goes, "We got 2 of them." And I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. He was so proud. He was so happy. Man, it was amazing. It was amazing. It's like, that's the reason I never wanted to tell this story, because I wanted to keep it all to myself. But I think the reason that I want this story to go out is because I want my son to listen to it, and I want him to maybe think about the times that me and him have had our own memories, when we gone fishing and stuff like that. I don't want my son to just remember me always yelling at him and being on his case, and because my son he's an awesome man. He's an awesome man. He just turned 23 years old. He's getting ready to graduate college. I couldn't ask for a better son, and I mean that. But I'm kind of like my dad was. I'm very strict. My dad was very strict. He expected things to be just the way he wanted them, and that was it. He was a perfectionist, and I remember growing up. And I think back on it now. He was very hard on my older brother. My older brother being the oldest of the family at the time. My dad was hard on him. He was always on his back for everything, and I feel bad for that now. Because um, my brother didn't deserve that. My brother is a very good man, and I think that kind of affected him too. But getting back to this story, so we stayed there for maybe another couple of hours, and he got another duck. He got one more duck. Called, did a bunch of calling, but what ended up happening was the last time he went to shoot, there was like 6 or 7 ducks flying in, and when he jumped up to shoot, he shot the one. One fell into the river. That's the last one. And then something happened to his gun. I don't remember what it was, but something got jammed or stuck or whatever. And I just remember him, like, he was working on it in the blind. He was sitting there working on it. But I think he needed a screwdriver or something because he had pulled his pocket knife out. And he was working on it, but he couldn't, whatever the problem was, he couldn't fix it. So that was it. You can't duck hunt without a shotgun, you know. So, he was a little upset, but he was still happy. It was a good day. It was still early. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning still. He had got his ducks already. So it was the same thing in reverse. This time he said, "Mijo, stay right here." He goes, "I'll be back." He goes, "I'm gonna go pick up the decoys, take him to the truck, and then I'll come back and get you." So that's what he did. He put the shotgun back in the case, grabbed the gunny sacks, and walked out to the river, started collecting all his decoys, and he probably had 2 or 3 dozen of them. And as he was collecting the ducks, his shadow, of course, was swimming right by his side, and it was magical. It was really amazing to see that I never knew how awesome of a duck hunter my father really was. He was. It was like I say, it was like watching a video on YouTube, a duck hunting video. You know, my father was he was amazing. He was an awesome duck hunter, and in New Mexico, I know like states like in Louisiana and stuff like that. You see guys going duck hunting and they get 40 ducks a day each. You know what I mean? But in New Mexico, to even get 3 ducks in one day, that's amazing. We don't have ducks like they do here. Just just because of the way the ducks fly on the river, and it's not like they're floating all over in the swamps and everything like that. You got to call them in. There's a lot to it. And my big brother Dave and his son Matthew, they ended up being pretty awesome duck hunters. I myself, I used to like to hunt, but now it's hard for me to kill animals anymore. I'm just at that age where I would rather see them alive and swimming in the river or whatever than shooting them. That's just my personal feeling. And for those of you who love to hunt, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the idea of hunting, and I've hunted myself many times, and I've been deer hunting, elk hunting, duck hunting, dove hunting, quail hunting, pheasant hunting, all that. But I just can't do it anymore. I feel bad, for these poor animals because they have it so hard. But anyway, so then he takes all his stuff to the truck, and then I see him coming back to get me. And I'm not scared no more because it's light, it's light outside. It's not like before in the morning where it was dark, I couldn't see nothing. So I could see everything that was going on, And at the same time, I could hear the hunters down the river. I could hear them shooting, and it was awesome. My dad comes back. I jump on his back, and he grabs his shotgun. He puts the all the other stuff, pours the charcoal out, and then goes and gets By this time, his thermos was empty, so he went and filled it up with water from the river. He poured it on the charcoal a couple of times, made sure the coals were out and everything, and grabbed his shotgun, all the stuff, and then he said, "Okay." I jumped on his back and went back across the river, and that was it. It was over. And I was so happy and so excited and so was my father. I could see it in his face because I think he finally felt that he had a little hunting partner that could go with him hunting now on his days off. Because up to that point, even though he had his dog, he was alone. and believe me, he still went many times after that with his dog, you know. And that's the point that I'm getting to. Anyway, so I just remember after that, we get in the truck, we head back to town, and we didn't go right home. Instead, we went to Gizmos, that store that I was telling you about. And, you know, I remember and it was Gizmos used to be on Central in downtown Albuquerque. And I just remember my father parking there, and I used to love to go with him to Gizmos because, you know, there was other firefighters there was policemen there, and they all respected my father. He respected them. They had a camaraderie, and they would see each other, and they would, you know, they would all, hey Al, how you doing? You know, and I could see you just came from hunting. Did you get any ducks? And you know, just talking. And, you know, they were over there. Oh, I see you took your son with you, and you know, because my father was Alfred Martinez, and I'm Alfred Martinez Jr. So everybody would always call me Baby Alfred. So I mean, I loved it because I loved my dad's name. I was proud to carry my father's name, you know. And in those days, you know, all the merchants at these stores and stuff, I remember they would give the kids suckers and all that. So I mean, for me to go out to the store with my dad, it was an epic thing, you know. I mean, the day was just the day from the second I got up that morning to that point of Gizmos. It was just like one of the best days of my life. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, I've had great days since then. You know, like I say, I watched my son graduate high school with honors. I saw my beautiful wife accomplish so many things, and I'm very proud of both of them. I love them both with all my heart and stuff like that. But you know, it's the relationship that a boy has with his father. It's a different thing. It's just a different thing. And for all you fathers out there, you know, don't give up, man. You know, don't give up on your boys, on your kids. You know, I know it's hard. I know we struggle. I know sometimes it feels like you're alone, and the weight of the world is on your shoulders. But you know what? Regardless of what we go through as men in this world, we have to remember that child, that son or that daughter of yours, to you, I mean, to them, you're like their hero. You know, you can't quit on them. You can't do that. You have to keep going forward, whatever it takes. You know, whatever struggle you have to go through to put food on the table, to put them in soccer, put them in football, baseball, whatever. You know, you have to do it because that's God's most sacred mystery in this world, is family. And what's going on right now in our world is they're tearing at the fabric of, you know, of our life. I mean, they're chipping away, I should say, at the foundation, at our foundations, and that is our family. You know, they're trying to break the family apart. You know, they have you know, people thinking that, you know, it's easier to live. It's easier, like for what I mean is, they make it like if it's easier to break up, to get a divorce or whatever, than it is to just be fighting all the time and arguing and all that. But that's not true. You know, every healthy relationship, people have their disagreements. We're all made differently. God made us all different. We're not going to agree on everything all the time. It's okay to argue sometimes with your wife, your girlfriend, or whatever. It's okay. But you have to control yourself too. And you know, I feel hypocritical sometimes because there was a time I was violent, you know, with my girl. I'm gonna be honest with you. But you know what? I've changed, and even though we may argue and stuff like that, I will never, ever, ever, till the day I die, lay another finger on her out of anger. I won't do that. Because when we're not angry, and when we're at, like, she does a lot of stuff with the church, with the Catholic Church and stuff here in town, and when I sit there from afar and I watch her, the way she carries herself in the room, or the way she conducts herself, like in church, or all the functions that she goes to, it's amazing to watch. And I'm so lucky to have her in my life. And I don't want to do anything to hurt her anymore. I just want her to be safe and happy and feel safe around me. I don't want her to be afraid around me. And you know, so as I get older, I'm changing more and more, and I'm realizing now how special life is. You know, and that's the moral of my story. We never went hunting again, me and my father together. And he did go hunting a few more times after that, but what happened was he went duck hunting one time by himself up over there near Algodones, New Mexico, which is a little bit past Belen and Las Lunas where me and him went on. And he didn't have any luck that particular morning. While he was walking back to the pickup truck in the morning, him and his dog, suddenly a duck jumped out. There was some ducks swimming in the ditch. And when they flew out of the ditch, my dad seen him. My dad, he reacted and he shot and he knocked them both down and they both fell in the ditch. Well, at that moment, I think he realized that he had made a mistake because he was close to the end of the ditch. In other words, he was, the ditches have culverts that the water flows under the street through, and then it comes up on the other side in the ditch on the other side of the road. And so he was very close to the culvert when he shot the ducks. So when he shot the ducks, Shadow took off after him. And before my dad could stop him, he jumped in the ditch. And he ended up drowning. And I didn't know none of this till years later, till my big brother told me what had happened. But what I remember was that day, it was a weekday again, and all my brothers and sisters were at school. It was just me and my mother and my baby sister home that day alone. My little sister was asleep. I was playing, in the kitchen or whatever. My mom was doing dishes or whatever. I don't remember exactly, but I just remember my dad driving in the driveway and parking his truck under the carport. And then he didn't get out of the truck, though. He didn't get out. And what was weird to me too is I didn't hear the dog. And usually, like I say, my dad's dog, he was always excited. When he would get home from hunting, he would be just as excited as when we left in the morning. So, but I didn't hear him. I didn't hear him jumping around, barking, anything like that. I didn't hear anything. He was just silent. So, I remember I was standing in the kitchen looking out the corner window of my dad's truck, but I couldn't see him. The angle that I was at, I couldn't see my dad. I saw the truck there, but I couldn't see my dad. He was sitting in the front seat. And my mother was washing dishes at the time. And right over the sink, there was a window. And apparently she could see my father. And I looked at her, and she was looking at him, and then she put her hand over her mouth. And instantly, I had this feeling of dread come over me. I don't know, it's hard to explain. I just felt that there was something very, very wrong at that moment. And my mom turned around, she ran out of the door, she ran to my dad's truck, I remember. I could remember her opening the truck. So I ran after her. I was looking out the screen door, looking at my father. And my father was just sitting in the front seat of his truck with his head down. He wasn't saying anything, he just had his head down. And I just remember thinking, what's wrong with my daddy, I didn't say nothing. I was just looking through the screen door. And he looked at my mom, and I could hear that him telling her something, and her talking, and he started crying, and she hugged him, and she just hugged him real hard for like 5 minutes. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, what's going on, man? What's wrong with my dad, So she turned, and she started walking in the house, so I ran back to the kitchen. And then I just remember my dad coming in, with his head down. He sat on the kitchen table and he put down Shadow's collar on the table, his choke chain, because my dad used to have one of those choke chains on him, and he would take it off and they went duck hunting, so the dog wouldn't get caught up on the trees or anything when he was swimming, when he was retrieving ducks or whatever. So I just remember my dad putting the collar on the table, and he looked at me, his eyes were full of water. I went to run to him, and before I could ask him what was wrong, my mom stopped me and she said, go to your room. So that's what I did. Like I said, that's what we did. We didn't question it. We didn't say anything. I just turned around and went to my room, and I sat on my bed. And I just remember I could hear my dad crying. And that's the only time in my life that I ever heard my father cry. And he was wailing like he just lost his best friend, which he did. My dad cried for 15 minutes, and it was probably the worst 15 minutes of my life because I could feel his pain and his crying. It's something that Oh, it's horrible. It broke my heart. And the reason it broke my heart, because I could feel that his heart was broken. And the thing was by this time my dad had already got another lab. She was a female, and her name was Shadow. I mean Shade. Sorry. The male dog was Shadow, and the female was Shade. Well, Shadow had got Shade pregnant. She was pregnant at that time. She was getting close to having her puppies already. And I just remember her. She would, when they would go hunting, it was crazy because when my dad would get home, she would ride because my dad had built a kennel. He had a concrete slab. And like I said, my dad was a perfectionist. I mean, in those days, my dad had like the most beautiful lawn in the neighborhood. That's what men did in those days. It was like whoever had the best lawn in the neighborhood wins. Every Saturday morning you would hear lawnmowers all over the street, people mowing their lawns and stuff like that. So my dad, he had a beautiful lawn, and then in the backyard, in the corner of the yard, he had a kennel that he had built for the dogs with a concrete slab, a dog house, everything. And what my dad would do when they would get home from duck hunting, he would leave everything in the truck. He would get down with his dog first. Now that's his first priority. And usually the dog would be dirty from the river water and stuff. So my dad would wash him, dry him up with a towel or whatever, give him a bowl of food, and then he would take him, put him in his kennel. And then while the dog was resting, then my dad would unload the truck and all that. So Shade, she understood that. So she would sit there patiently waiting for Shadow to come to the kennel. And from my bedroom, I just remember sitting on my bed, looking out the window to the backyard, and I just remember seeing Shade sitting in her kennel, looking out the back door with her tail wagging. And then I heard my father get up. I heard the kitchen chair going across the wood floors, under the table, and then I could hear him walking out the door. And then I could see him walking in the backyard to the kennel. And as he did that, I just remember then Shadow didn't, I mean, Shade, I guess she noticed that Shadow wasn't with him, so she started barking. She started, like, she was angsty, she was agitated. And I remember my father opening the gate to the kennel, and just going in there and getting down on one knee and hugging her real tight for like 5 minutes, and he was just crying. I mean, it was awful. It was just awful. They say that a good dog, when the owner dies, the dog will die. There, pretty much right after that. But in my father's case, it was the other way around. Because my father died that August, just maybe 4 months after that dog drowned. And I remember my brother telling me one time what had happened, and he told me that when the dog went to go retrieve the ducks, my dad had noticed. My dad knew that my dad ran after him, but it was too late. The dog jumped in, and he said my father told him the whole story that the dog was, once the dog realized that he was in trouble, he started swimming back towards my father, the opposite direction of the way the water was flowing, but the current was too strong. And, all of a sudden the dog just disappeared. And my dad, he knew that if he jumped in, he would drown. So what he did was he ran to the other side of the street where the water comes out, and he could see the water boiling, and then after about 3-4 minutes or whatever, Shade came out. And he had drowned. He was dead. So my father jumped in the ditch. He pulled him out, and he buried him right there next to the river, right there where he drowned. He never brought him home. And I just remember the look in my father's face that day. I'll never forget it. And all my brothers and sisters, when they got home from school and they heard the news, they were all devastated. My dad's friends, I mean, they were all calling him and saying, "I what happened, I'm sorry." Because everybody knew how much my dad loved his dog and how much my dad was hurting, I mean, we were all crying. I mean, it was just horrible. It was a horrible time in my family's life that day. And my father was never the same after that. So he didn't have that spark in his eye anymore. He didn't have that, I don't know, it's just hard to explain, but the thing was, Shade was pregnant, with those puppies from shadows. So as she got closer and closer to having them, my father was getting more and more excited because, he was excited at the thought of having one of Shadow's puppies and training them all over again and all that. So he was getting prepared. Well, that day never happened, and this is how life works. I remember. So what happened was the day my father died, him and my mother that evening had went out. They got dressed and they went out dancing, and they were going to go to my grandparents or something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but like I said, my father loved Spanish music, and him and my mother loved to dance. That's what they did. That's what people did in those things. The couples went out, they had their beers and their cigarettes, and they danced and had a good time, and then they went home. And I remember that night, as my mother was getting ready, it was me and my father and my baby sister Maggie. He was holding my baby sister, and my sister Berna and I think my sister Grace were in the living room. My dad had the radio on, and he was telling my mom, "Andale vieja, hurry, let's go." She was, I'm coming, just give me a minute." And you know how women are. And I remember my dad, one of his favorite songs came on by, one of his favorite artists at that time was Vicente Fernandez. And that song, Volver, Volver, came out, started playing. I just remember him getting up and dancing, holding my baby sister in his arms. Like I said, she was 8 years old. And, every time I hear that song by I can't remember what that guy, the Neville Brothers, Byron Neville, I Dance with My Father Again. Every time I hear that song, it reminds me of that moment. And I just remember my father gliding across the living room with my baby sister in his arms, and she was laughing, like she was laughing uncontrollably. My sister was a little roly-poly, and she had big cheeks. You know what I mean? She had little fat legs. I mean, that's just the way that's the way we were when we were babies. We were chunky. I just remember him dancing with her across the living room and her laughing and everything. And then my mom came out of the bedroom and she looked beautiful and stuff. And he handed the baby to my sister and they went off that night. And I went to bed and everything. And then I don't even remember. All I know is it was late. It was dark. And my brother jumped out of bed, and I thought my parents had, I got home or whatever. So I got up and I went to the living room, and I remember seeing my dad sitting there in the living room and rubbing his chest, and he wasn't feeling good. And I went up to him and I hugged him, and he hugged me, and he's like, "Mio, I don't feel so good." He goes, "They're gonna take me to the doctor." He goes, "I'll be back," he said, but he told me no matter what happens, always make sure you take care of your mother. That's the last thing my father ever told me. And he left. And my brother drove him to the hospital that night. My mother had stayed back because she was taking care of my little sister who was crying because the crib was in their bedroom. She was trying to get her settled down because she was being fussy and stuff. And then later she got in the car and she went to the hospital. But there again, I didn't know until my brother told me the story of what happened at the hospital. So they get to the hospital. They lay my father down and they take him to the emergency room. They put him in they laid him on a bed or whatever. They put the IVs and all that. And he was having a massive heart attack, And in those days, I guess they didn't, you're talking 1971 now. And I guess they didn't, they weren't as advanced or whatever as they are now or whatever. So when he had his first heart attack, my brother was there with him. I guess they started doing CPR and all that, and they brought him back. And then, so it was him and my brother in there. By this time, my mom had I guess got there or whatever. And my brother told me that he just remembers my dad, laying on his back and looking over to my brother. He had an oxygen mask on and stuff. And my brother said that his eyes were just filled with water, and that he was crying. And, a lot of people say, well, he was probably scared, but I don't think that's what it was. I think what it was my father knew that he was dying. And the reason he was crying is because he was thinking to himself, who's going to take care of my family now? What's going to happen to my family? Because that's the way men were in those days. Men were about God family, and country. That's the way the men were in those days. It's not, you know. So I believe that's why my father was crying. And then he died. And I didn't know. I went back to bed. And I just remember getting up in the morning. It was August, I think, 12th. And the house is full of people. My grandparents are there. My grandmother's crying, her eyes out and everything. And I'm like, what's going on? You know, and I get up and I'm still in my pajamas. I walk through the house full of people and stuff. You know, I remember my grandpa Chencho, my dad's father, coming up and hugging me, and you know, say, "Oh, mijito," and this and that. And the whole time, I'm just looking around for my dad. Where's my dad at? Where's my dad? And then my brother came and got me by the hand. He took me outside, and he told me, "You know what?" He goes, "You know, Jesus took Dad. He's never coming home no more." And I didn't understand what that meant. All I knew is my dad was gone. And then about 10 minutes later, I hear all these sirens because, of course, you know, my dad's company, the fire department had heard that he had passed away. And they were coming to pay their respects. So in those days, the fire trucks, the firemen would stand on the back of them and they would hold on to a bar, you know, as they were driving down the road or whatever. I just remember hearing all kinds of sirens, and I'm still freaking out. I mean, I just found out that my dad's never coming home again. I look down the street and I see all these fire trucks coming down the road. We lived on a dead end street. And yeah, sure enough, they're coming to my house. And, you know, first there was I guess the chief, the battalion chief was first. And then those days they used to drive those old Suburban, those old carryalls, you know. So he pulls up and there's like a couple other chiefs with him, and then there's a chaplain with them, and then all the fire trucks pull up behind it, like 4 or 5 fire trucks from different companies that came, and there was like 20 firemen out there walking around, and they were all crying. They were all had tears in their eyes, and I didn't understand why, you know. And they were all coming up to me and hugging me and saying sorry, hugging my brother, hugging my sisters, hugging my mom, and my dad. People love my father. He, like I said, he was a good man. He was a man's man. So everybody in the neighborhood would come by. His old employees would come by. All my uncles, aunties, cousins. I mean, it was for probably like a week straight. It was chaos at our house. There was so many people there, you know. And so it was a big thing, you know. As you would think, you know, I mean, it was in the newspaper and everything. You know, a fireman dies of a heart attack at 37. You know, I mean, my dad had 7 kids. He left behind 7 kids. My mother was only 32 years old at the time. He left to raise 7 kids on her own. So it was a big thing. You know, the mayor was there, the governor, I mean, the chief of police, all the battalion chiefs. And my dad's funeral was a big thing. My dad was the first firefighter in Albuquerque that was carried on the back of a fire truck for his funeral, you know. Now they have a truck especially for that, but my father was the first one that they did that for. And I remember the day of his funeral like it was yesterday. The night before, for the rosary, it had poured, it had rained like crazy all night long. Thunder, rain, like crazy. And the day of the funeral, it was a beautiful day. It was sunny. Of course, it was still wet outside, you know, because it rained so hard the day before. But so we went to the church. I mean, the church was standing room only. People were standing outside and everything. And mass with my father. And you know, instead of having pallbearers like his brothers and cousins and uncles and all that carry him, the fire department, they had firemen carry him. They took him, put him on the top of the fire truck, and then. We left St. Anne's Church in the South Valley here in Albuquerque, and then they were going to bury him at a cemetery kind of close to downtown. So the route that the fire truck took went right by station number 1 in downtown Albuquerque. And I just remember as we drove by the station, all the firemen. In those days, the firefighters weren't allowed to come out of the firehouse unless they had a hat, a tie, you know, their shirt, you know, their pants tucked in, and the shoes shiny. I mean, that's the way it was. It was like kind of like a military thing. I just remember as we passed by Fire Station 1. We stopped in front of the station and they rang a bell a couple times or whatever. The firemen all saluted my father. And I'm talking, there was firemen for blocks. As we drove by, and then we went to the cemetery. We buried my father. And it was done. My father was gone. He was gone. He was never coming back, you know. The thing was, is when we got back to the house, and this is irony, okay? My dad had been waiting for Shay to have those puppies, anticipating every second, waiting, and she hadn't had them yet. The day we buried my father, when we got back home, while we were at the mass, she had the puppies. So when we came home, and I was sitting in my room again, looking out the back window, I'm looking, and I couldn't see her in the kennel. She was inside the doghouse or whatever, and she didn't come out. And usually she would come out when people would come, and she wasn't coming out. And I knew that she was pregnant. I knew that we were waiting for the puppies. And sure enough, I went out there to check on her, and she had 5 puppies in the doghouse with her. So the day that we buried my father is the day she had the puppies. You know, and that's the thing about this story, and that's why in the beginning I said, you know, this story is epic, because it is. It is. It's not just a story. It happened. It happened to me, my mother Irene, my brother Dave, Rita, Betty, Grace, Bernadette, and my baby sister Maggie. It happened to us. My brother, at the time my father died, was 16 years old. He was the oldest. I was 6. I was a year older than I was 6. So we were still babies. And suddenly we were left in a world to fend for ourselves. Our father was gone. He was the head of the house. He was our protector. He was our provider. He was our everything. And though my mom got through it, my mom, let me tell you, she's an amazing woman. She is in her late 80s now, and of course she's not doing as good as she used to be. She went through a bout of cancer, and now she's old and weak and frail. And, you know, in early stages of dementia, she's losing her memory, and it's heartbreaking to see it, you know, because after my father died, she was the strong one. She was the one taking me to the football games, and she was the one scolding me when I was ditching school or I was late or whatever the case may be. But it's a story that, for my family, changed the course of our lives. And I just want to say to all my brothers and sisters out there, to my mother, I love you guys with all my heart, you know. I know sometimes you guys feel that maybe I talk about that too much and stuff like that, and I'm sorry for that, but you know, that's just the way it is. He's my father. I love him. I'm always going to talk about him. I'm going to keep his spirit alive as long as I'm alive. I hope my son does the same for me. Anyway, I just wanted to share that story with you guys. I hope you liked it. I hope you stayed till the end. I hope it wasn't too boring for you. And I'm going to be starting a new series now, and it's called You Think You Know Me. And I'm going to be interviewing some other friends of mine and people and talking about some of the experiences in their lives that had a profound that changed their lives, you know, whether it was in a positive way or a negative way or whatever. That's what I want to do. You know, we all come from somewhere. Never forget where you come from. You know, always be proud of who you are, where you're going. Don't let the world bring you down. You know, the Bible always tells us that, you know, God will never give you more than you can handle, and I know it's true. From a lot of personal experiences, I know that it's true. But I also know that God is my Heavenly Father. I'm always going to wonder why He did what He did, why He took my father away the way He did, and I'm going to ask Him that one day when I'm in heaven and I'm standing in front of Him. I'm going to say, God, why did you do that to me? And people say, well, you know what, you're not supposed to question God, but you know what? I don't feel that's true, because my Heavenly Father is just like my earthly father. And just like a little boy is going to question his earthly father, Dad, what, Dad, that, whatever, I'm going to do the same thing with my Heavenly Father. I'm going to question Him. I'm going to tell Him, why did you take my dad? You know, why did you do what you did? Because I don't understand. I never will. But anyway, I want to thank you all for staying with me through this story. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Y'all have your own stories. If you did like it, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit that bell, and share it with your friends and stuff like that. And if any of you have a story that you want to tell, feel free to get a hold of me through my YouTube channel, or you can get a hold of me through my email, which is almartinezjr2013 at Hotmail, all lowercase letters. And send me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.